In the case of the missing groom, another factor weighs in, and it's money, as is so often the case. Now, remember, George and Jennifer had just come from their wedding and their reception, and apparently at the reception, people were stuffing checks and money into their pocket. They apparently, one or both of them, bragged that they had thousands of dollars back in their stateroom on the ship, Brilliance of the Seas. Just what you don't do when you're traveling abroad and you're amongst strangers. You don't get drunk and brag about thousands of dollars back in your stateroom.
There were definitely rumors on board that George and Jennifer had between $15,000 and $50,000 in cash. I don't believe that those rumors are true. My brother was actually very responsible with money, and I highly doubt he would have had that kind of money in cash. However, what matters is the fact that somebody believed that, and that could be a possible motive for the crime, and we believe that probably is the motive for the crime. We were not made aware of any missing money. Jennifer, told us very little about the night that George went missing. She said that she couldn't remember, and she couldn't recall a lot from that night, and so she didn't actually ever tell us that there was any money missing from the room or the safe or any of her jewelry for that matter.
When I think about this story and I think about what happened here, this is a bright young couple. She's going to be a school teacher. He's going to take over the family business. The future is so bright for this couple. And then on their honeymoon, for this to happen, I mean, George was excited to be married, excited about what was going to happen, and really excited about the cruise and the honeymoon. He didn't want anyone to hey, listen, don't contact me. He was telling, don't contact me unless it's the end of the world or somebody dies. Other than that, just leave me alone. Let me have fun here. I mean, this was supposed to be a trip to remember for a lifetime. It wasn't supposed to be the end of his life.
What we know is this: that evening, the two of them go to a very romantic dinner. They're on their honeymoon. Everything's romantic. They go to this fancy dinner, very elegant dinner. Then they go to a casino on board the ship. They spend time there, and that's very well documented because in the casino on the ship, there are tons of video surveillance cameras. So that is very well documented. Also, we learn on these cruise ships, there are surveillance cameras all over the place. The surveillance cameras then catch them going onto a bar. So they're at dinner, they're at the casino, then they're at a bar. And they're drinking, and they're drinking, and they're drinking, and it's been a long time since supper time, all right? And they're drinking all these exotic wines and liqueurs they may never have had before, including, again, absinthe. They get to the bar. There they befriend a group of Russians.
And for his family, for George Smith's family, to this day, to not have the answers. Well, first you've got the tragedy of losing George. And then not knowing what has happened here and the way it has torn people apart and the level of frustration that goes through your mind when you're trying to say, how does this happen? It's a honeymoon. It should be the happiest time of his life. And now you flash forward so many years. 7 years, and still not an answer. No arrest. No George Smith.
6 victims of cruise crimes testified before Congress. Then there was a panel of expert witnesses discussing maritime law. And finally, the cruise lines answered up. Congressman Shays and other representatives there discussed possibly putting air marshals, cruise marshals in effect, on board, as well as other possible reforms such as mandating reporting.
Marie, where were you the night or the day this happened?
I was in my office when Jennifer came with a staff captain, and he told her that something outside the ship indicated that Mr. George Smith may have gone overboard.
And what did you and Jennifer do together during that time after that?
I basically spent the entire day with Jennifer. She was not alone. I was with her all day long from 10:15 a.m. till 6 p.m.
And what did she think? What did she go through?
I mean, it was a terrible moment for her. She was crying. She was confused and disoriented. I was with her when we had to go to the terminal during the questioning, to the police station, to the hospital, and then in the terminal again.
In your opinion, did the cruise line do everything it could?
Yes, we did, sir.
Why wasn't the questioning done on the ship?
Well, we asked the authorities to come on board. They didn't want to. They wanted us to go outside in the terminal.
Do you know why they didn't order the ship? Because there was some blood at the scene, right?
That's what I heard at the time. I was not aware of it.
Oh. Do you know why they didn't order the ship to remain in dock while there was an investigation?
Well, I think Mr. Fain will answer this question.
Do you know why, Mr. Fain?
They did their investigation, and they said they had collected all the evidence that they needed, and the ship stayed about another 4.5 hours after that point.
The captain thinks, Marie, I understand, that he fell overboard, right?
That's, I think, what he said.
What does he base that on?
Well, the fact that we found blood on top of the canopy, on top of the lifeboat.
Which would tell you that he fell and hit the lifeboat?
Eventually, yes.
You know, Larry, in retrospect, I'm certainly sorry the captain expressed his view. Captains do tend to speak their mind, but he based his personal opinion on the evidence that was available to him at his time, having looked at a cabin that didn't appear to be amiss, what evidence he had. Frankly, we don't like to speculate on those things. That's why we bring in the authorities as soon as we know. And in retrospect, I wish he had just left it to the authorities to make their own statements.
What we know is there was blood in the stateroom, and that somehow George Smith ended up outdoors on his balcony. Now, according to people that processed the scene, it's very difficult to close the doors and then close the curtains. Imagine that. How out on the balcony do you shut the curtains and shut the doors behind you? But that's what police found. They found blood in the stateroom, the drapes totally closed, the door to the balcony shut tight, and blood on the balcony. It's so easy to be that Monday morning quarterback, sitting in your easy chair, calling all the shots, saying coulda, woulda, shoulda. But I know one thing. I know you don't treat a crime victim the way Jennifer Hagel was treated. Jennifer is George's bride. The Turkish police drag her off the ship like she's a suspect. She's not a suspect. They question her roughly. Okay, her husband is missing at sea. Well, we all know he's dead now. She probably thought he was dead then based on the blood on the awning. The Turkish police drag the bride off of Royal Caribbean's Brilliance of the Seas. They get all of her belongings and dump them in a box or a suitcase and leave them in front of where the ship was. She has to find her own way home. Her husband is probably dead. She's being treated like she's a suspect. And the ship leaves. We managed to obtain statements of the neighbors of George and Jennifer that evening. George Smith, the 26-year-old missing groom, and his bride Jennifer. And one of them was very credible, in fact, is a police officer in the States. The neighbors claim, that on either side of the stateroom, claim that they hear furniture being moved around, thuds, in the room of George Smith, the missing groom. There are the Russians that befriended the groom, George Smith, that night. There's also Jennifer Hagel, the bride, who was with him near the end. There's also a young man from California. His name is Josh Askin. Now, Askin is a friend that the couple, the newly married couple, befriended on this cruise. They met, I believe, in Florence. The night that everything went wrong, that George goes missing, Josh Askin is on the scene. He's a California resident, and that evening, he was the one with the absinthe. Now, interesting about Josh Askin, getting drunk is not a crime, but Askin claims he passed a privately conducted polygraph, but when the FBI gave him a polygraph, he flunked. On the other hand, Jennifer Hagel, the bride, passed her polygraph with flying colors, as did the casino manager. Now, a lot of people argue polygraphs are not allowed in evidence, and that is true in some situations. Now, as to the Russians, sadly, they all took the fifth. They refused to answer questions. Just recently, they were caught on tape. Unbeknownst to them, the tape would ever surface. And they were joking and laughing about George Smith's death.
The tape first came to our, we found out that it existed, and I had some conversations with in-house counsel at Royal Caribbean, and it was part of the turnover of information and evidence that they made to us as part of the settlement that we entered into with Jennifer Hagel Smith and the Smith family with Royal Caribbean. And as part of one of our discussions regarding what information they had, they mentioned that they had this, at the time there was a videotape which had the, in which the Russians sat around the afternoon of the morning that George passed away, and they discussed his death in a mocking fashion.
These guys are obviously bratty kids, they're punks, they're troublemakers. It doesn't make them murderers. The fact that they're callously making fun of an obvious tragedy, whether it's accidental or whatever happened in that stateroom, doesn't mean it measures up to murder. Just because they're saying horrible, rude things, it's not necessarily a confession. I think if it was a confession, we'd have seen arrests.
Well, we investigate this whole incident, and we measure that the stand area. It's about 4 feet. Of course, this case, we have to keep an open mind. There's just two possibilities. One is an accident, he falls. Second is a murder. So the murder, of course, have a possibility. And equally, it's possible, could be accident. That's why we went on the ship to try to reconstruct, to hopefully find some clue to eliminate the other one, and then we can look at if it's murders, we should just take a more detailed look and try to find evidence. I'm so happy to hear that have a videotape now surfaced. It's so important to see that videotape, also when that videotape was taped.
Cuando supe que estaba embarazada tenía 12 años. Mi futuro, yo pensaba que iba hacia abajo.
Teen pregnancy in Cartagena is a very big issue. When you go to the slums, it is unbelievable what you see. Many of my girls live here. This is so wrong. You see these girls, they're babies holding babies. About 10 years ago, I was volunteering at this maternity hospital, and I was holding this baby, and he passed away with me. His teen mother failed to raise the money to cover treatment. 4 days later, my own son passed away in an accident. I realized I didn't want any mother to feel the same grief that I went through. My name is Carolina Escobar, and I'm helping teen moms get a healthy and productive life for them and for their babies. When we first started at the maternity hospital, we reduced dramatically the infant mortality rate. But the real problem, it was much bigger than that. My girls end up being pregnant because they don't have a sexual education, and many of my girls are sexually abused. When my girls come, they drop their babies in the daycare center. We have different workshops so they can develop their skills.
Mi meta siempre ha sido tener mi restaurante. Sé que nunca hay que rendirse en la vida.
We are changing the lives of these girls. If you give them the right tools, they're capable of moving forward.
As you know, my brother, George Smith, went missing on July 5th from the Royal Caribbean Brilliance of the Seas. We believe he was murdered on his honeymoon with a lifetime of happiness and a promising future ahead of him. George is very missed by his family as well as his many friends.
Here we are talking about a probable murder, and we're having questions whether somebody was partying or not partying. And what that has to do with the murder, I don't know. And the FBI, I'm sure, doesn't think that has anything to do with the murder.
Now, it's very interesting to me that renowned scientist, forensic scientist, Henry Lee, Dr. Henry Lee, from O.J. Simpson fame, actually went onto the boat to perform scientific tests. He wanted to look at the stateroom and perform tests. Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines refused to allow Henry Lee to perform a reenactment with a mannequin to determine what he could about the fall from the stateroom. Now, why is that?
I think the record will clearly show that the appropriate authorities were involved from the word go, that the Turkish police, and again, this is the normal procedure for the FBI, that they will allow and request that the local authorities do whatever investigations, forensic or otherwise, that need to be done.
Good luck to passengers wishing to understand their rights at sea. Even attorneys find it difficult to navigate the complex jurisdictional boundaries, statutory definitions, treaty provisions, maritime traditions, and fine print liability disclaimers. Even when the law is clear, the effective reach of U.S. authority depends on the willingness and ability of cruise ship operators to make security a visible priority, recognize and report incidents, preserve evidence, and conduct thorough onboard investigations.
You know, when you don't know a horse, you look at his track record. I don't know what, if any, involvement the three Russians had to do in George Smith's disappearance, but I know this. A couple of days later, they were thrown off the boat, them and their families, after claims they sexually molested a woman on the boat. When all the dust settled, this is what we know. Jennifer Hagel has since remarried. She sued Royal Caribbean. She got a settlement of about $1.1 million. She's remarried and she is a mother. George Smith's family never gave up the fight. They had been front and center, looking for answers, looking for justice. True, they got a settlement from Royal Caribbean, and yes, they should have sued. Their settlement was about $300,000. And Royal Caribbean has